So I think we're good to go. Welcome to my presentation, getting into game programming, stuff they don't want you to know. Apologies for the clickbaity title, but hopefully it pulled in a few extra people. All right, so my name is Kevin de Ridder. I'm a software engineer at Offworld Industries. I'm also the co-op supervisor at Offworld Industries. I've been coaching a lot of students who are there, and worked with a lot of SFU students, which has been good. Always happy to have people from SFU over at Offworld. Yeah, so I started at Offworld myself as a co-op student, and after I graduated, I've been hired as a programmer there. So I've been at Offworld for my entire career, but it's been good so far. And I've been I got into coaching and mentoring pretty early on, and I really enjoyed it. So I've been kind of going with it and trying to expand the program. This picture there is me. I think I was still a co-op student when that was taken. I did some motion capture animations for Game Squad, which was a lot of fun. So I got to run around with a fake gun in the tight suits. That's great. Okay, so at Offworld Industries, our main title is the Game Squad, which is a multiplayer online shooter with up to 100 players per match, which is it's a lot of fun to work on. The main focus of the game is on communication and real-time strategy and teamwork. So for Squad, we're using Unreal Engine 4, which uses C++. Yeah, Offworld Industries started as a modding team for a Battlefield 2 mod, actually, which was called Project Reality. People from that modding team decided after 10 years of modding, it was time to move on to greener pastures, so to speak, and started working in the brand new released beta of Unreal Engine 4. Yes, Squad is what came out of that. Currently, we're in 1.0. We're out of early access, and we're currently working on amphibious stuff, which is adds a lot of complexity to the game, but it's a lot of fun to work on. The picture is obviously a work in progress. It doesn't look as good as the other images yet, but there you go. All right, so these are the points I'm going to touch on during this talk. So let's start with a little disclaimer. So as I said, I've been working at Offworld for my entire career, and this talk is like from my perspective. So what I say is not necessarily representative of the entire game industry, but hopefully it will give you a good overview, and so it'll be pretty useful. It's based on my own experience hiring and coaching co-op students, as well as stories I've heard from my colleagues that have worked in other companies in the industry. So yeah, I hope you find it useful. I'll talk for about 30 minutes, and then we can go into a 30-minute Q&A session. So hopefully you have lots of questions prepared for me after that. If anything is anything I touch on, I'll be touching on quite a lot of topics during this talk. So if anything you like more in-depth insights on, or have any questions on, then we can go into that a little bit deeper at the end of this presentation during the Q&A session. If there's any questions of clarification while I'm doing my talk, it's okay to ask questions, and I can answer them. But if it's more in-depth stuff, we can go into that in the Q&A session. For the people that are here in the room, I understand we can be here until 8:30. So if there's anything after the talk and you want to hang out and chat a little bit, I'll be available to stick around for a bit if people want. All right, let's get into it. So let's talk a bit about working as a programmer. I'll talk a little bit about my experience first. So like I said, I started out as a co-op student, and when I started, I did a lot of blueprint conversion tasks. So Unreal Engine 4 works with a visual scripting language called Blueprints, which is very good for prototyping, but it can be very expensive when you run it during the runtime. So a lot of that stuff has to be converted to make it production ready, and that's a good task for co-op students or junior programmers, because it really shows you how the visual scripting side and the C++ side work together and like interact with each other. So I found that quite insightful. So I learned a lot about the engine that way. After that, I've been working on a lot of implementing a lot of networking systems on the game side. So since Squad is a 100-player game, network optimization is very, very important. Otherwise, it's just not going to run well. So that's this big thing that we focus on at Offworld. And yeah, so I've worked with both systems that have been engineered by more senior programmers at the time at the company, as well as new released networking systems that Epic has put into the Unreal Engine. So Epic is the creator of Unreal Engine, particularly. After that, aside from that, I've also worked on bigger game features and bug fixes and refactoring code. So I've touched a lot of the code base since, especially at the start of all this, it was a pretty small team. So there's a lot of ground to be covered by everybody. So you get a good chance to explore into different areas, different disciplines. Currently investigating if we want to upgrade the engine to a later version of Unreal 4, which is taking a lot of my time currently, but that's okay. And we also have a different project currently at Offworld Industries that I can't say what it is yet, unfortunately, but I've done a lot of fun like weapon abilities and stuff for that project as well, which is always fun to see. The feedback is very immediate if you implement a new weapon and then you get to try it out and blow some stuff up. It's always fun. But a big focus for me has been on mentoring. That's actually the part about my job that I enjoy the most, more so than programming, even though programming is also fun. So mentoring a lot of students over the years and keeping that up. All right, so let's talk a little bit more in general what you can expect as working as a programmer. So like me, it will probably, as a junior programmer or a co-op student, you can probably expect similar tasks, so small bug fixes, maybe conversion tasks if it's Unreal Engine or something with a visual scripting language, and then work your way into small features and gameplay tweaks, and then slowly, as you get more experience and more familiar with the project and the code, you'll move on to bigger features. And like I mentioned, there's many areas that you can specialize in, like networking, AI, UI, audio, animation, all that stuff. So like I mentioned, if you work at a smaller company, you'll get a lot more chances to explore all those different areas. And rather than if you work at a big studio, big name company, you might be like a little bit more here, might be a little bit more set on how far you can explore. So teamwork is very important when you're working together on a project. Sometimes students can be very good at getting stuff done on a project that only they work on, but then if somebody else were to look at it, it would be completely unintelligible and not make sense. They wouldn't be able to do anything with that. So no matter how good of a programmer you are, you always need to keep that teamwork aspect in mind if you want to make it in the game industry, because games are made in teams, except for some exceptions, obviously. But, so you want to work well together to communicate and make sure that your code is up to snuff and it makes sense. So code reviews are a big thing that we do in the industry. So before you check something into the project and the version control, at least one programmer has to go over your code to make sure that it looks good before QA gets their hands on it and rips it apart. So crunch is a thing that you often hear about associated with the game industry, which can be a bit of a turn off maybe for some people, that might be afraid of having to spend too much of their free time working and crunching if they were to get into the game industry. But luckily at Offworld, we don't really do crunch. There's definitely companies where you don't have to sell your soul to the company, just code every day and night. So we do have some crunch going on still, but it's more in a voluntary way. If people want to get their stuff in before a big release, they might pull some extra time and go extra hard at it, but there's no expectation from the company that people do that. I personally still think it's not a great precedent to set any kind of crunch, but it's better than mandatory crunching. But I've heard even from a friend of mine who works at EA, which EA has had a lot of flack over the years for crunching and stuff, but from what I understand, for him, it's not that bad for the team that he's on. It maybe depends a bit from team to team, but for him, he's worked on FIFA and it's been like maybe 1 or 2 weeks before a big release where it has to be all hands on deck. But outside of that, I think still have a pretty good work life balance in case people are worried about that. But even outside of crunch, this line of work can still be a lot to handle with a lot of problem solving needing to happen. So I would say if you're not really passionate about programming and game dev, we're more in it because there's a promise of making good money as an engineer, then you're probably not going to have a good time off work. Yeah, I would recommend against that, but programming and game dev is fun, so I wouldn't know why people wouldn't want to. That's okay. All right. So I'll talk briefly about what the co-op program looks like at Offworld Industries and what you can expect. So we start people off with some tutorials and training on UE4, and as well as some blueprint conversion tasks as well to get familiar with the engine before they start working on the full project, and they'll get coaching and help as well from the rest of the team and mainly their coach. So that will be about 6 or 8 weeks of like doing that before they move on into the real project and get to work on games like Squad or one of the other projects that we're working on. And because networking is such an important part of what Offworld does, we always get them to make a little network game. Like they spend like 2 or 3 weeks maybe on making a little network project and learn all the ins and outs of networking in Unreal Engine. Learn a lot that way. So I have some examples here. I think this game, the first one is called Whiplash, where the person made a multiplayer car game. The GIFs are not loading very well, unfortunately, but hopefully you get the idea. We've got the snowball fight with guns as well, and we've got a project called NP, which stands for Networking Project, very inspired name on the bottom left. And then the one on the bottom right is called Not a Prop Hunt, which was very enjoyable to play as well. Player has to hunt other players who are little ghosts from Batman. Yeah, it's always students always learn a lot from doing that, as well as it's always a lot of fun to play with the team after they're done. You get to play what they've worked on. So yeah, after that they get to work on the main project and do lots of tasks there, and they fully become a part of the team and join all the meetings and the stand-ups and all of that, and get to work on bugs and small features and small gameplay tweaks and things like that, which is good to get them familiar with. And then after, like, we always get co-op students for 8 months because 4 months is kind of short. Usually we find that after 4 months, the student really becomes part of the programming team and gets a bit more independent and less reliant on the coaching, and that way they can like kind of experience what it would be to just be like a junior programmer on a programming team. So I think that 8 months period is very valuable for both the company and the students themselves to get to that point where that can happen. I have a little video from one of our students that I got permission to show. He worked on Squad, and he made a little video of what he's worked on as a presentation. where's my cursor? So you get an idea of the game squad as well as what students can work on. So we had a very inefficient way of showing markers on that map. So he got to work on rewriting that and making it make more sense. We a senior engineer made the body dragging system, but there were a lot of bugs and unfinished parts of that. So we got co-op students to finish up that. Yeah, there was also this wall hack exploit, which is not good for a competitive first-person shooter game. So he managed to fix that for us. And then, of course, there were many, many more bugs and exploits that he fixed, like this network desync. It's a server and client desync that caused the drag player to be catapulted away. Yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea of what co-op students might work on. So yeah, this sounds interesting. You might want to try to get a job at a game company, but how do you land a job interview? That's the big question. So the most important thing is to have a clear and relevant resume. You want to really make sure your resume is tailored for the industry that you're applying for. So you want to put a lot of programming and game-related projects on there. Like I get a lot of resumes still where people just put their professional work experience at the top, but if it's not related to programming or game dev, it's not relevant to me. So if the first thing I see in a resume is that somebody worked in the kitchen at Pizza Garden, for example, and they work great in a team under pressure, like that's great, but no offense, it's just not relevant to me. So I don't need to see that kind of stuff. But if there's like small game projects that people may have made on their own or in a team where they've participated in hackathons, or even if it's something they did way back in high school, it makes sense to list that near the top of the resume so that the recruiter will see that and pick you out to go to the next step of the interview process. Excuse me. So for Offworld, we get a lot of resumes, and I think any game studio gets a lot of resumes. So we don't have time to read through every resume. So you want to make sure that some keywords are highlighted near the top of the resume so that we see it, because we look for maybe a couple of seconds, and if we don't see any keywords, then it's just like done, and we move on to the next one because we just don't have the time to. As much as I'd love to read every single resume I get, it's just not feasible. Yes.
We've got a question in chat, and feel free to move on as this is to one of an answer. But how did you showcase your personal game projects?
How did I showcase them? Yeah. Me personally?
Yes.
So I'll touch on that a little bit later. That's the next slide, I think. Okay. So yeah, so for Offworld Industries, C++ would be highly relevant. Unreal Engine experience would be great to have in your resume. Even Unity experience would be good to have on there, since it's another 3D game development engine, and experience with that is definitely helpful. And then a relevant cover letter is also very important. If a company asks for a cover letter and people don't attach one to the application, then the application is probably not going to be considered, even if the resume looks good on its own. Yeah, let's go to next slide. So here are some resumes that I've gotten. These are both from students that have made it into a co-op position at Offworld. So these were successful resumes. So for the first one, we can see at the top there's C++ right there. So that's a good sign to not be discarded right away. And then we see hackathon projects, which is always good to see, because it shows to me that people are really interested into programming and gaming if they're willing to spend their free time like doing hackathons and not getting any sleep, doing all that kind of stuff. So Yeah, for this person, I think the list went on with like 4 more projects on the other page. So that was what impressed us. And then there's a BC Game Jam right there. So that's games. So that's pretty good. We just see those things and then we put it in the pile that we want to look at more closely later and move on. And then for the second person, same thing. C++ is at the top, Unreal Engine 4, the first 2 things. That is perfect. And then he mentions professional experience, Unreal Engine 4. He made a project there. Now for this person, I don't think it was actually any professional experience that he got paid for. So be careful with that. It probably would have fit better under projects. But even then it would be great to have, like, if you have something in Unreal 4 and it's a game, then you stand a high chance of getting in. So on the resume on the left, we see a GitHub link, which is good. It can be helpful. I personally don't look at them too closely. Some people check the timeline and see if people have actually been submitting stuff recently, or if it's just something that they did as a once off. I personally, maybe I take a look, see if there's any projects on there that have like a clear page that describes what they do with maybe some pictures. But if there's not, I'm definitely not going to be reading any code that the person wrote, because it takes too much time. So GitHub is good, but what this other person has is a portfolio website, which is the best case to showcase game projects that you've done. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I'll show off his website real quick. So this is the person I showed you the squad video of that he made. These were the projects that he already had on his portfolio website here when he applied. So there's like images. It looks appealing. There's a lot of stuff here, and then when you click to see what it is, it's like a little game that he made in UE4, which is plays. Looks pretty fun. So this is a very good way to stand out, because most people don't have this that apply, at least to Offworld Industries. So if you add something like this, it's a pretty surefire way, if it looks good and appealing, to land at least the first interview there. So for the question, how to show off game projects, that would be a good way to do it. For me personally, when I applied as a student at Offworld, I had a website where you could play a Unity game in the web browser. So that's kind of what I use as my portfolio website for that. So hopefully that answers that question. If not, feel free to ask for clarification there. All right. Going through my slides way too slow, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. And if there's any points you see in here that I am not touching on, but you'd like to know more about, feel free to note it down or remember it, and we can come back to it in the Q&A session. So another thing I look for is enthusiasm about programming and game dev, as I said. So like hackathons and like personal projects are a great way to show that if you're willing to invest your personal free time into doing this stuff. That tells me, as far as I can tell from a resume, how excited people are to make it. I also get a lot of resumes from people who are just kind of interested in seeing what the game industry is like. But those people, unfortunately for them, never end up making it into a job position, because there's much more enthusiastic, eager people that are set on becoming game developers out there. And I'd much rather spend my time coaching and teaching them, because they'll probably get a lot more out of it than those other people would. So for me, enthusiasm is even more important than technical skill and ability. There needs to be a baseline, but if I have somebody that's super good, like super good programmers, a lot of experience, and he might not be that interested in game dev, there's not that much point for him to actually get the co-op position, because he already knows a lot of stuff. And if he's not going to end up in game dev in the end, it's not really that beneficial. But if somebody who is there that shows a lot of eagerness to learn and that seems very teachable, then I would pick that person over the more technically skilled person. So technical skill is not the number one thing that we look at. And then teaching is also a thing that I like to see. I'm probably biased. I don't know if other companies would do this, but I like teaching a lot. So if people spend their free time teaching programming to others, then I also like teaching that person so that they can kind of pass on the knowledge forward and kind of expand everybody's knowledge that way. Oh yeah, and connections is very good to have. So the way I got into Offworld is I knew somebody who worked at the company, and that happens a lot in the industry. If you know people, you'll go places a lot faster than if you don't. It's possible to make it, but it's a lot harder if you don't know anybody. So while you're in school, I would suggest make a lot of connections. If you end up in a co-op position, talk to a lot of people, make those connections. They might come in handy later. I know it as a view, there's the game development club here that's hosting this talk. So if you're not already a member of that, it would be a great way to make some connections, because some of the members have actually been co-op students in game studios in the past. So if you talk to them and they think you're cool, they might refer you to a mentor there, and you might get yourself an interview that way. So just a suggestion there. All right. So the interview process, I've got a couple of tips here. I have a lot of stuff I could say about this, but I'm not going to go into it too deeply right now. So the first thing I would say is just be open and be honest, be yourself. Don't try to tell the interviewer that what you think they want you to say. Just say what you actually think and what you actually feel. Because if people notice that you're not being honest, then you're not going to get the job no matter what. I've definitely had interviews where I've had people like that were like trying to like gauge what I want them to hear, and then they would give me answers that didn't sound honest to me at all. So those interviews don't last very long, unfortunately, for those people. I'm also giving you a lot of insight into what I'm looking for. So I guess that's the stuff they don't want you to know part about this talk. So you could abuse that to game the system a little bit and get an advantage over people that might have less knowledge there. But I would just advise you to not abuse it to game the system in a dishonest way, because like people are always going to find out in the end, and then you ruin any future chances there. So please don't do that. But I trust that everybody cares honest. So don't be nervous. That's my next point. It's very easy for me to say, although maybe not that easy because I'm pretty nervous giving this talk, to be honest. It's been a while since I've done stuff like this, but yeah, people often feel, I get the sense that they have to answer every question correctly, and that if they make a mistake, they might fail the interview. But that's not how most interviews work. Like usually the interviewer is going to keep asking questions until you don't know the answer, just to see how deep your knowledge goes. And they're going to do that to every candidate. So everybody's get to the point where they can't answer anymore, and everybody's going to not know the answer to the question. So if that happens to you, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. You might still advance to the next round, or you might still get the job. So try not to worry about that too much. Hopefully that helps you be a little less nervous, but most people are going to be nervous either way. Just wanted to say that. Yeah, I'm just going to move on to the next slide, and we can maybe get into the Q&A session in a bit and talk some more about these other topics that people want. So some tips for the job is like, make sure going into the co-op that you know what your goals are. Like, make sure you know why you picked the company and why you accepted the offer that they gave you, and yeah, set out a clear outline for yourself of what you want to learn and what you want to get out of it, and make sure you tell that to your mentor. Like, I know that the school asks you to set goals for your co-op reports and stuff like that, but it's more important that you know for yourself what you want to get out of it, and that your mentor knows it, rather than what you actually fill out on that form. Because you'll just get a lot more out of your placement if you know what you're working towards. And if your mentor knows as well, they can help you. They can help you get there. So like I mentioned before as well, talk to everyone around you, make those connections that are going to be useful in the future, and like, get to know people. Maybe they can help you get into the industry later on after you graduate. ask a lot of questions. There'll be a lot of knowledgeable people around you when you go to a co-op. So make sure you use that knowledge to your advantage. A lot of co-op students, including myself when I was one, tend to think that if you ask too many questions, you're wasting valuable, precious time of the people that are actually working on project-related stuff. But the matter of fact is that they are there to coach you. It's part of their job to help you and answer questions. So please don't be shy and ask those questions. In the end, it's up to them to manage their time efficiently. So if they get overwhelmed with too many questions, they might ask you to like save some for later, and that is fine if that happens. But as long as they don't say that, I won't worry too much about it. And the same as asking questions, ask for help. If you get stuck with something, don't go looking at Stack Overflow for 2 or 3 hours and not getting everywhere, because you'll have those people around you that can help you there. And yeah, they'll be happy to help. And maybe they'll just give you a 5-minute answer that just points you in a better direction to be looking at, rather than you just trying to do it on your own. Like, doing this stuff on your own, you can just do one personal project. But if you're in a co-op, it's kind of a waste of time to not use the resources around you. So what I would say, let's see, what do I want to talk about this slide? So yeah, like I said, there's many different disciplines that are for game programmers, like AI, UI, audio, animation, networking, graphics, art, tools, DevOps, even the people side of things. So if you don't know what you're interested in, talk to your mentor and see if you can kind of explore all of those areas. If you do know already what you're kind of interested in, like talk to them and see if you can go in that direction. And then soft skills are very important too. So like I mentioned before, teamwork is very important. Be a good team player. Nobody likes to work with a kind of lone wolf programmer that just does everything on his own, and then it's very hard to read and work with later. So the soft skills are very important and a good thing to train and get experience with at a co-op placement. So I would advise for like at least one of your goals to be soft skill related. What that should be is probably up to you, your personality. All right, so conclusion, TLDR, make some games and have fun doing so. I guess that can sum up my talk pretty well. I think I talked for 32 minutes. I managed to not go over for too long. So with that, we can go over into the Q&A and it was insightful, and if not, hopefully you can ask some good questions and I can give you some insights that way. All right, I'm gonna take a sip of water. Who wants to go? Who wants to go first?
Hello.
Also, as a note, can you also repeat the question? Because I'm not sure if people on
Okay.
the room can hear anything from the room. Someone asks. We already have a question in chat if you want to take this one.
Sure.
Right. It's a long one. When looking for relevant skills, do you mandatorily value experience with the engine your team is using, or do you also value close hobby and or professional experience with one or more other engines? How much of a disadvantage would it be?
Sorry, what was the first part of that question?
So from my understanding, so do you value the experience with the like, would you value the experience with the engines that your team uses over like hobby experiences with other technologies?
Okay, so the question is purely about experience with what engine or what language people would use. So do I value people that work with Unreal Engine 4 over people that have worked with Unity in their spare time? Is how I understand that question. Yes, we do value experience with Unreal Engine 4 over Unity experience. You give some examples there, just because there are some pretty big differences between those two engines. But we do value Unity experience as well. Just like any kind of experience with a game engine is better than no experience at all. And like I said before, the experience and proficiency is not the main thing we look at when we're hiring a student. We're also considering who would get the most out of the placement as well. So if if you have Unity experience and some other candidate has Unreal experience, it doesn't automatically mean that the Unreal experienced person is going to get the job. That's a good enough answer for that.
I have one.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of the talk, actually, your team was thinking of upgrading to a newer version of Unreal 4. How difficult is it to do that kind of upgrade? Because there's also Unreal Engine 5, which is like the new thing that's coming out. I'm wondering if you considered upgrading that as well.
Okay, so the question is about engine upgrades that I talked about in the beginning of the talk. How difficult it is to upgrade the engine to a newer version, and how difficult it would be to upgrade from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5, and if we would consider that. So the answer to that is that, okay, so we have two big projects that we're working on right now. One is Squad, which has custom engine modifications that we've put in to work around some restrictions in the engine and a lot of optimizations that we've put in. And then we're working on another project, the second project, which runs on the vanilla Unreal Engine. So there's no modifications whatsoever to that one, and all our code is purely in the project code itself. So for Squad, it is quite difficult and time consuming to upgrade the engine, because every change you make, it's going to cause conflicts. When Epic modifies the code, then your code is going to be in conflict with that. So you're going to have to manually resolve that, or lose all of your engine changes, and then you might get some performance hits or some bugs that might be coming back. So that's can be a very long process depending on how many changes you've made. If you just go from the basic vanilla version and you upgrade up, it's depending on from which version to which version you go and how many steps you've passed over. So going from 423 to 427 is a lot more difficult than going from 26 to 27. So our other team upgraded basically in one day from 26 to 27. And I've been working on resolving Squad for a couple of weeks already. So, and then as for Unreal Engine 5, most of the code is still the same as Unreal Engine 4. So it wouldn't be that much more difficult to go to Unreal Engine 5 than it would be to just go from a previous version of 4 to the newest version of 4. So yeah, we'll probably be looking into that at some point, but yeah, we have to investigate how much that's going to affect things. There are a couple of new systems and replacement systems in there, so depending on how heavily you rely on those, it might become more difficult. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I have a small follow-up now, which is what kinds of things did Unreal Engine 4 not do that you needed to like add a modification to?
So the question is, what sort of things did Unreal Engine 4 not do that we need a modification for? So I can't really go go into any specific details about what kind of modifications there are, but like because we have vehicles, we had to make a modification to allow us to have tracked vehicles in the game, because the Unreal implementation of the PhysX engine doesn't allow for you to do that, even though PhysX has that functionality built in. So we had to like make that layer ourselves too. That would be one example.
Cool, thank you.
Yes.
Question from Alex in the chat. Going back to when you were a student and observing the successes and failures, what would you say would be the best and worst things to focus on when working your way to becoming a professional in the industry?
The question is, what would be the best and worst thing to focus on to become a professional in the industry? I don't know if I can tell you one surefire way to focus on it. Like, really depends on the company, it depends what the project requirements are. But I think the best way to become a professional in the industry is experience. Like, a lot of students set goals like I want to be able to do this, and I want to write code quicker better and less mistakes. But the reality is that stuff is just going to come with experience and getting your code reviewed, reviewing other people's code and looking what they are doing. So yeah, you'll need to allow for some time to get there, but you will get there. And like I would say, like just ask for as much feedback from your peers and from your coaches and leaders as you can get. Speed up the process. So I guess as a flip side to that, the worst thing to focus on is trying to be independent early on, because you're just going to silo yourself off from the rest of the team and not get that feedback, and it's just going to slow you down in the end. You try to be more independent and more helpful for the team, but I think that's not a effective way of progressing. I hope that's a decent enough answer. Yes.
This might be a bit broad of a question, but was there anything that like surprised you when you actually went into the industry, like compared to what you were expecting?
So the question is, was there anything that surprised me when I went in the industry versus what I was expecting? Okay. I have to think back. Yeah, so I can only speak to my experience at Offworld, which at the time was very much an indie company at that point, with very few programmers and no senior programmers that had a lot of experience with game development. So there were a lot of things that we did back then that I have since learned are definitely not the way to do it.
Can you give some examples of that? That sounds interesting.
Okay, I can give you an example of something that I did. So I showed you the picture of me in the motion capture suit in the beginning. So that was part of our animation update. We were putting in a new animation system into Squad. And to do that, we already had the game in early access, so we couldn't break the entire thing and just basically be locked out of being able to release anything until we had fixed the new animation system. And the animation system was completely blueprinted or prototyped in Blueprint, sorry, I should say. So there was a lot of conversion to do, and that was what the conversion I mentioned at the start. So to get the conversion into our C++ version of the soldier, I couldn't break the old animation system in there. So what we did at the time was create a child class of the soldier, and we called it soldier new. And then we just put all of the new functionality in there. And then when the old animation system was going to get switched off, we switched on all the stuff in the new soldier. And then the plan was to merge them back together again. But of course, now 5 years later, we still have a soldier and a soldier new in the project.
Really?
And it's a bit of a pain to work with.
So do you just use the soldier new class and just keep the old one around for like no reason?
Well, so the old soldier had a lot of functionality that we still use as well, just none of the animation functionality. So we took that out of there, but we had to move the base functionality that both of those classes used. We should have merged that, but we never got around to doing that. So
Sounds like a nightmare.
yeah. So I wasn't surprised at the time, but it surprised me in hindsight that we did stuff like that. Is that satisfying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very interesting.
One question I had is, when you see co-op students, what's like a common big struggle that they have or some difficulty that they get when they first join?
So the question is, what's the struggle that I see most co-op students have? And it's what I touched upon earlier, like the asking questions and asking for help part. Like not every student does this, but most of them do it to varying degree, where they're very hesitant to ask questions, and like working remotely during the pandemic hasn't made that exactly easier either. And yeah, a lot of students just tend to feel like they shouldn't ask too many questions and they should figure stuff out on their own and just get on with it and get the task done rather than ask for the coaching and help. And that's just not a good way to learn. It will hold you back from getting as much out of the co-op placement as you can. And so yeah, that's kind of a soft skills thing. And that's also why I mentioned soft skills are very important. So one soft skill goal that you could set would be to be comfortable asking questions to your coach or supervisor. You were first, I think.
Just like basically piggybacking off this question very briefly, has there ever been a time as like a supervisor where you went, oh, this person is asking too many questions?
So the question is, was there ever a co-op student that asked too many questions? Yes, we had one.
Okay, but like what percent of the total co-ops would that person make up? Like
How many students did I coach? I think I've coached about 10 probably. And it happened once.
okay, so you're probably pretty safe asking a bunch of questions now.
Yeah. Like, and with him, I told him like, okay, like I would say in the first term of your co-op, you can't ask too many questions. They can come at an inopportune time and then the coach can say, okay, let me get back to you on this in like an hour or after lunch, whatever. But in the second term, I expect students to be a little bit more independent. So rather than asking for help or asking what to do, I would expect them to come up with a suggestion or like, hey, I'm having this issue. I thought about it and I thought about solving it in this way. Do you think that it would work or do you have another suggestion? That kind of stuff. So that's the feedback I gave there, and yeah, that works. So if your supervisor isn't complaining about you asking too many questions, then you're probably safe.
They're not just thinking, oh, this guy's asking too many questions. They'd probably say it fewer.
If they're a good coach, they'll say it. If they don't say it, then it's their problem, to be honest.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, it's always hard to focus in on the right amount of questions, right? Some students go from asking too little questions to asking too many, and you kind of have to dial it into a good level. But that's just part of the process. So that's fine. But yeah, you just need clear feedback from your coach. And if they don't tell you something is wrong, then you can't fix it.
That's a question from the chat from Hamza. Where do you think the industry of gaming is geared towards in the coming years?
The question is, where do I think the game industry is geared towards in the coming years? So I think more and more gaming is going mobile and free to play, unfortunately, which is not a trend that I personally like, but that is a trend that I'm seeing. So I expect to see that continuing forward as it becomes more competitive, because like in the end, every studio needs to keep their lights on and you need to make enough income to keep paying their programmers. So some studios more and more studios might see the necessity to go that route to generate a little bit more revenue, especially because when inflation goes up, the price of games doesn't tend to go up. So eventually it's gonna catch up. Okay, that's just my observation. Don't know how much credibility not to put in there. I'm not that much of an insider in what's going on in the bigger industry as a whole. Yeah.
One more question.
Okay.
From Alex. What common challenges come up and how do you deal with them on a day-to-day basis in your work?
So the question is, excuse me. Question is, what common challenges come up and how do I deal with it in day-to-day work? So a lot of challenges that come up are related to like tech debt, I would say. So when implementing a new feature or making tweaks or adjustments to existing code, there's like the older your code base is, the more you're going to run into tech debt, and this is going to block you from the ideal solution that you might want to implement, and it might slow you down in an unexpected way where you have to go down a rabbit hole to fix some weird things that nobody saw coming, and then to come up with a solution for it that ideally doesn't make the tech debt worse, because then it's just going to snowball and you're going to at some point get locked out of being able to do anything in any kind of timely fashion. So yeah, it can be somewhat mitigated by planning and investigating well before you go into a task, but the reality is that we don't always take the time to do that, and just kind of go in and start making changes and then find out that like, oh shoot, this isn't gonna work because of this and this thing that somebody messed up 5 years ago. Kind of thing. Yeah. My opinion, tech debt is always worth addressing because it might take a little bit of time in the short run, but in the long run, it's going to bite you in the ass, and it's just going to take you more time to solve in the future after already losing a bunch of time to trying to ignore it. So there's a lot of companies that try to just plow through it, but get in more and more trouble if you don't let your programmers fix it, detect it. Of course, the flip side is that you can make everything perfect either, because then it's just going to take forever to do anything. It's a balance there. But, yeah, I would say that's the biggest day-to-day challenge, running into those rabbit holes. Yep.
I doubt there's like a one-size-fits-all for this, but do you have any advice or techniques to reduce the amount of tech debt you accumulate as you add new features and stuff?
So the question is there any advice to reducing tech debt and stopping it from accumulating? So I think the answer to that is when you design a new system, you have to design it very well to be like very clear, easy to use, and extendable, so that anything you might want to do on the project in the future can be implemented in a clean way, rather than having to be a hack around some design flaw in your code. So the best way to prevent it from happening is good planning, hoping that you have good game designers that will be able to have a clear idea of what they want and not change their mind halfway through the project, and then you suddenly have to juggle a bunch of things around to change it up on a tight deadline. And the best way to address existing tech debt, I would say, is to, when you go into an area of the code, and as long as it's within the scope of the current task that you're working on, try to leave it a little bit nicer than you found it, and don't be like, screw it, this is already a mess, I might as well put this on top of it. So yeah, it might take you a little bit of extra time, but in the end, it's gonna pay itself back. I was gonna say one more thing about this, but I kind of lost my train of thought. No, I lost it. Probably wasn't important. Maybe we'll come back later. Does that answer your question, or do you have any?
Yeah, super straightforward enough. But I guess if no one else has any other questions, like immediately, like on the flip side, when you're trying to like use that strategy of like thinking ahead and making it extensible, have you ever run into the problem where you try to make something so dynamic and extensible that you kind of lose sight of what the original task even was?
So the follow-up question is, have we ever gone in the other direction where we tried to make something so generic and extensible that it kind of became a hindrance to working with that system? And I think the answer is yes, that happens as well. So as with anything in life, balance is your friend. Like extremes are never good. Like too much, like making stuff too generic and needing interfaces and stuff so it can communicate with each other can make the workflow very hard. And, that reminds me of the other point I was going to make at the end of the last question, which was like a lot of tech that can come from dependence, like interdependence of different systems. So, for example, having your weapon depend on the inventory makes it so that you can't decouple the two. Like you always have to go with that weapon system and that inventory system. But then if your weapon depends on the inventory system, if you want to just have a single weapon in the field that doesn't necessarily need an inventory, well, now it needs an inventory because it's dependent on it. And you can, because it's become interdependent over time, you can decouple it and have a nicer solution for that. So you'll either have to write a new weapon that doesn't relate to your old weapon. That's then a kind of a standalone thing, but then you create tech that way because now you have to maintain two different weapons instead of just one. So like keeping systems separated and interchangeable in a way is good to reduce tech debt. But yeah, yes, you can definitely overdo it and like everything needs an interface to connect with anything else, and then it just becomes a nightmare to work with as well. So yeah. Yes.
Got a question from Alex. If you could go back to your first year on the job, what would you do differently?
So the question is, if I could go back to my first year on the job, what would I do differently? And the answer is ask more questions of my people around me.
How did you first get into like game making?
The question is, how did I first get into game making? Okay, now you're gonna get me on a tangent. But so when I was in my early 20s, I kind of dropped out of like secondary education because what I was trying to follow wasn't really for me, and I was interested in like maybe becoming a game designer, and I had some ideas of games that I wanted to make, but I wasn't able to program. And at the time I felt like programming was way too difficult and I'd never be able to do it. But I realized that nobody was going to just program my game ideas for me, so I kind of had to learn it. And luckily, my brother in university had learned some Python, so I got him to teach me how to write Python. So I made some very programmer art text-based games in Pygame. Yeah, that's how I got into making games. And then I got the game to a point where I could play kind of what I wanted. It was a good prototype. And then I got to the point where I had to like balance my game design so that like things actually made sense. And then I realized I couldn't be bothered to actually do that. So I found out that I actually didn't want to be a game designer after all. But then looking back at the code, I really enjoyed like writing the code, designing the code, and designing it in a very extendable way, so that like if I wanted to expand the system with like new moves or weapons or stuff, it would be easy to do. And I kind of got a kick out of like solving those logic puzzles and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. Let's keep doing that. So I kept making like off and on over the years. I kept making stuff in Python, and then at some point I decided I had to like pick up some studies. So I decided why not game program. That's how I got into it.
So back a little while ago, we were talking about all these like negative aspects of like bad things that can go wrong when developing a game. But, like, what were some of your experiences when you were like working on features that kind of just like went surprisingly well, were really fun to work on?
So what were features that worked really well or were surprising to work on? Let's see if I can think of a good example that I'm actually allowed to talk about as well. Yeah, a lot of the stuff that I did where I had a bit more freedom and less tech debt to deal with was on the newer project that I worked on, but unfortunately I can't give any information about that yet, so I can't really answer that. But on squad, like there's always some sort of tech debt that creeps up on you and you have to deal with it. Sometimes worse than others. Yeah.
Sort of related.
So how long did it take you from starting making games to like actually making the first ball?
So the question is, how long did it take me from actually making games to landing a co-op? So I think I made games from like just off and on in my free time. If I felt like it, I'd work on a project for a bit and then just go back to playing video games and doing other stuff. I did that for about 3 years or so. And then I started my game programming course. So I didn't go to a university here. I went to a smaller college, which had a 2-year course, which was 1 year of classes and then 1 year of co-op after that, and then finished. So I did the year of classes and then I got my 1 year co-op at Offworld. And then I got hired. I just stayed on basically as a junior programmer after that. I think we're at the 1 hour mark, but I'm fine with going over a bit.
Related to the question you asked, what would you say is like your favorite part of your job? And then also on the other hand, what's your least favorite part?
Okay, so the question is, what's my most favorite and least favorite part of the job? So, so my most favorite part of my job is coaching and teaching. It's not programming related. Well, it's programming related because that's what I teach and coach. And it's just really, really fun and satisfying to be able to help people like get better and improve and get into the industry, get that in. So, like that's what I enjoy the most. I'm currently not directly coaching anybody, but I'm still involved in the co-op program and working with the people that are coaching right now. And yeah, that's a lot of fun working with students and working with junior programs. That kind of stuff. And then the least favorite part. Let's see. So, yeah. Like I would say, dealing with tech debt and like unforeseen big problems can be really annoying. Take a lot of time and like really slow down what you wanted to do and what you're planning to do. So that's less fun, but it's all right. It's part of the job. So you get there eventually, just a bit slower.
So I have a quick question here. What's your kind of like interaction with the game designers and the artists as a game programmer?
Okay, so the question is, as a game programmer, what is your interaction with game design and art team? So it really depends on the task. Sometimes when you're implementing more back-end system in the game, you might not have much contact with people outside of your team, or like, yeah, depending on what you're working on. But if you're working on new gameplay features or fixing bugs, we tend to work quite closely with our designers and just like go up to them or message them and be like, hey, how did you intend this feature to work exactly? Because at this point in the code, I like kind of have 2 different ways I could go. So which one would you prefer? Kind of thing. Yeah, or even coming up with some suggestions to make what you're working on a little bit better. Propose it to them, and maybe they'll tell you to put it in. So you actually still have some, like at companies like Offworld that are smaller, you'll definitely get some influence on how the game is designed as well if you work closely with that design team. So that's really fun as well. But you don't have to do all the hard and annoying balancing work. So it's kind of perfect. And then for the art team is a little bit less contact depending on, like, sometimes there's tasks to develop some new tools for art. So if we're working with them on like what they want, like how they want you to implement it, or sometimes like uh, if stuff is not well optimized or need performance improvements, you might work on them with figuring that out. But that's more on the, it's kind of more on the tech art side, where it's the tech art role is more where the programming and art gets combined. So usually that department is kind of in between programming and art. So you have less of a direct contact with them, at least in my experience. I'm sure it's different.
Is there a team that's like tech art specifically as opposed to regular art?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. The question is there a team that's tech art specifically? The answer is yes. It's a different kind of team and discipline from just purely programming or purely art. So they do a lot of like, for us, they do a lot of shader related stuff and post-processing, that kind of stuff. Well, we're at an hour and 6 minutes, so we're out of questions. I think it's a good place to end.